Welcome to the Cutting the Gordian Knot podcast. Today we're joined by David Larson. We're talking about everybody's favorite subject, and that is hell. If you haven't checked out David's channel, it's the Once and Future Church. If you start Googling, you'll probably start finding it. So we're going to start out with you, David. I hear that some people aren't fond of the doctrine of hell. What's the tension? What's going on? What are we trying to solve today?
Yeah, I think there's probably a lot of church history where maybe the mindset of people was a little more comfortable. They had public executions. They had pretty hierarchical and strict ways of looking at things. There were slaves. I feel like maybe people's mindset in the modern times is very sensitive to everyone getting the dignity of the person and everybody being sensitive to everybody's experiences. And so for modern people, I think often it's just shocking to them that, so you're telling me, especially if you apply some of the, from Augustine through the Middle Ages, some of the words that were used by saints about, pretty much everybody's going to hell. There's a very, very narrow window. I think, there's a couple saints I'm trying to think of that had these, they would give exhortations to their flock and say, in a room or in a city of 30,000, only about, 3 or 4, they'd have a very specific and tiny number. And they said people would faint during, so I guess people were scared of it back then too, but it's just, they accepted that this is just the way it is. And so just that mindset, I guess, for some people today, and maybe it's not just the different ages, it's just a sense of justice so God is just, upholding this paradigm where he's bringing people into reality. And I know we have original sin and all of that. So maybe there's some justice on that end that we're broken, and that kind of sets us on a default path to hell in some sense. But kind of the idea that this is a paradigm that he could hold up, really, that almost everybody's going to a place where just moment by moment torture is going to be our if we wake up in the morning, I don't know, or maybe we're just screaming all night too. There's no sleep. Okay. You just each day you're just experiencing more and more torment. And so I do think there's a lot of people who are trying to think, okay, is there a way that I can hold on to the core doctrines of the church? I think neither of us wants to just say, oh, we know better than the Catholic tradition, and we're just going to start tossing out doctrines. But is there a way we can understand this? Maybe makes a little more sense logically or morally, to where God's character is upheld because I think that's the big problem for a lot of people, is they want to uphold that God is good and he's loving. What I would give to my children, he would give even greater to his children. He knitted us in the womb and, lovingly made each of us, thinking about us. But then if that baby is, isn't baptized before it dies, is it just, as Augustine said, maybe lesser punishments, but still tossed into hell? So, I mean, that was even not quite palatable to people throughout the Middle Ages, where they started to soften that and add, purgatory rather than just lowest punishments. I meant limbo. Where they said limbo maybe is the answer to that. So yeah, that's kind of the landscape, I guess, on a broad sense. Is it seems pretty brutal to modern ears, but we also don't want to really just toss out the doctrinal landmarks, the major doctrinal statements. So, I mean, I see frequently people cite this as the reason why they left the Catholic Church, and sometimes religion in general, is they're like, that just doesn't make any sense to me, that, this baby's born and isn't baptized, and the loving God just tosses it into the fire. So I'm excited to talk to you about all this, because there are so many ways we can go with it.
Yeah. And I mean, we've both kind of come to, okay, for the listener, it's a big topic. It's a hard topic. I think it's going to resonate with everybody. And the way that David solves it, and the way that I'm going to, well, not really solves it, deals with this, frames this, is different. So we're both going to be really careful to stay inside the bumper bowling lanes of orthodoxy. And we're both shooting for a strike here. So we're going to go kind of back and forth. And I want to hear what David's sees in scripture, sees in the magisterium, that helps to resolve the real tension of hell and a loving God. And then I'm going to give a few things which I think help to resolve or mitigate the tension. And then it's up to the listeners to pick and choose what variation, because I'm pretty sure everything we're going to say, to the best of our possible abilities, totally inbounds group of solutions in the church. So the church has not said this is exactly how it functions. There's some room to speculate. So let's start speculating. First thing, I mean, what do you do? What's your first kind of way to resolve the tension?
Well, first, I like the way you put that, because I I don't think the church is probably going to say this is the only way to see it. What the church has generally done is put down those markers. And so the Massa Damnata, fewness of the saved, hell is a place of literal fire. I think that's probably going to remain an Orthodox way of looking
Mm-hmm.
at it.
Yep.
But maybe the way I've taken it, one I guess is you look at scripture. I think a lot of verses that have been assumed to be talking about hell, just modern scholarship and uh, even not just secular, but I also noticed that in the Dewey Rames version of the Catholic Bible, used to be the English official for Mass Bible, there were 110 mentions of using the word hell. Guess how many they are now with the NABRE, neighbor, whatever version that is used in Mass today for the English language countries?
Let's go for 28.
Zero.
Zero? What? Oh my goodness. They need more help. They need more help. Okay.
We need more help. Well, basically, what was interesting about that, I guess my point is they've sort of realized that the concept of hell as we define it theologically, none of these words are a perfect fit for it. It's not that there's no suggestions of hell, but
Mm-hmm.
in the Old Testament, the Greek word they'd use to be Hades, and then the Hebrew word Sheol. They've been starting to translate those as the grave or the underworld or that kind of thing. But it's a holding place before the resurrection. It's not your permanent home, because if heaven and hell are sort of in theology, we talk about those as eternal states, maybe. So calling Hades and Sheol as those are sort of equivalent words that are substituted out, whether you're talking Hebrew or Greek. But we don't use those now in the Bible. They'll say, maybe even just say Hades sometimes, or just say Sheol, but they won't put hell. At least in the neighbor version that we read in Catholic English language churches. And then in the New Testament, maybe the word that gets debated more, I think most people accept that about Hades and Sheol, is
Mm-hmm.
Gehenna.
Mm-hmm.
And Gehenna, you could read a lot about this topic. It's incredibly interesting. Some people, like Bart Ehrman, I think largely just see it as talking about this valley of Hinnom, and so it's more of just, this valley of Hinnom was a place where there are child sacrifices. It may or may not have been used also as a dump. There's debate about that outside of Jerusalem. So it's kind of a symbol of don't be thrown into the dump. Don't he sees it more that way. I don't think that's I prefer, or what's more convincing to me is maybe what N.T. Wright or there's a lot of, I guess, just looking at the school of Hillel and the school of Shammai were the
Mm-hmm.
two main Second Temple Jewish schools in Jerusalem that most people, like the synagogue system that was teaching everybody and all that, they didn't just see it as a city dump or as a symbol entirely. They also saw it as a post-death purification place. So
Yeah.
Hillel, the school of Hillel, not during Jesus' time, but directly after, they kind of solidified the idea that it is, you can only go to Gehenna for 12 months. So if you talk to modern Jews, they
Hmm.
only allow you can only mourn your parents for 11 months. And the reason for that is you're supposed to honor your father and mother. And if you mourn for 12 months, you're saying your father and mother were the
Amen.
worst possible people,
Okay.
because
That's
Gehenna
interesting.
is only a 12-month period. In Jesus's day, so that was like I think it was Rabbi Zakkai, something like that. He was right after Jesus, but during Jesus' time, the Hillel and Shammai schools um, had a concept of Gehenna, and it was used in a variety of ways, but just kind of to say you're going to be punished after death. And it's, I guess, the Shammai one was a little stricter, so they thought about a third of people in Gehenna will be completely wiped out, and they will be incinerated. There's some suggestion it could even be an eternal torment. At the very least, I think more people thought it was an annihilation, that they'd be turned to dust. Um, and then the rest of them it was more of purgatory, basically, where you're on the way to Gan Eden, which is their heaven. But those are, and then the Hillel one that was more Paul was in Hillel under Gamaliel, and they thought a little bit more of just generally purification rather than anybody being annihilated or tormented. But the idea was sort of in development. So when Jesus talks about Gehenna, I think it's important to kind of keep in mind what those two schools, the general Jewish ideas in Jerusalem among Jews would have been. And it's kind of just a post-mortem punishment, where it kind of grew out of Hades, where Hades is where you go after you die. And the bad part of Hades um, would often be called Gehenna in that sense before the resurrection. And then the good part, sometimes called paradise or the bosom of Abraham. Um, and I know some of what I'm saying is debated. Some people might not totally agree with that framing of how I'm saying it, but um, they would see this is all taking place. The way N.T. Wright put it was, yeah, hell is awful, but it's not the end of the world. Meaning this Gehenna is before the resurrection. Um, However, the way you're treated in Gehenna kind of symbolizes what will happen at the resurrection too. So if you're like uh, the rich man and Lazarus,
Mm-hmm.
Pope Benedict said in his Spe Salvi, that's more about the pre-resurrection state, that the rich man, he is in Gehenna, he's in fire, he's in Hades, and the other one's in the bosom of Abraham, which is the good part of Hades. So this is all before resurrection, but it still symbolizes um, or suggests what will happen when you're resurrected. Because if you're in the bosom of Abraham, you're probably going to be resurrected as the greatest of these. And because those are kind of flips sometimes, who is greatest and who is least, and then others be resurrected to shame. So maybe just the last point is, I think that's the important part is, are you resurrected to glory or are you resurrected to shame? Are you resurrected to life or punishment? So I think that's where the heaven and hell topic really comes in. It's not in the Sheol, Hades, or Gehenna waiting period. Although I think Gehenna, as I said, could suggest eternity, but it could also suggest purgatory. Brant Petra, however you say his name, had
Yeah. Petrie.
Petrie has a good thing on the Jewish roots of purgatory, where he talks about how a lot of the things Jesus was saying about Gehenna, are more about purgatory. He didn't say all of it. It could be seen different ways on some of it, but on like everyone will be salted by the fire, or you won't get out until you pay the last penny. There's certain things when he's kind of suggesting about Gehenna. So that's, I think, why they stopped translating Gehenna as hell as well, because it's not quite that clear that that's how his audience would have heard it, because that's not the concept they had of Gehenna. It was more a variety of things as an image. And then pretty soon after Jesus' time, it was kind of a 12-month purgatory, because they said it would be unjust for God to punish somebody forever, except there's still some rabbis who thought the very most wicked people of all time
Mm-hmm.
will be in Gehenna forever, or at least, maybe resurrected to some state like that. So that's sort of, if we're starting with the scripture part of it, that's how I get to a point where now we're just talking about when you're resurrected into a new creation,
Mm-hmm.
and God, as you're talking about Father Rooney's book, where he says God's presence is all in all and it's everywhere. Some people are resurrected to glory where his presence is fulfilling to them, and others it will be a fire that will be unpleasant to them. I think that's where the real conversation on heaven and hell really, for me, takes place on what does that look like?
Oh, okay. Lots to talk about there. Um, well, first clarification. So flowchart would be you die in a state of mortal sin, you go to Hades, and then from Hades, what are the possible branching paths here? One is resurrected to this fiery something. Are you saying that there's still a potential to be burned into ashes, annihilationism?
No, I'm just saying that's what the Jews of his day thought. I wouldn't say that's probably not an acceptable Catholic view.
Okay,
Um,
and then
to
yeah, because there's questions about that. I used to be an annihilationist. Then when I came into the church, I dropped it. Now I'm not, both because I try to follow the church and because I've become persuaded that annihilationism isn't true. But like some people, like Trent Horn, say he's pretty sure that annihilationism could be in bounds to Catholic teaching. He's one of the few that I've heard say that. So I was interested to see if you think that's a possibility.
well,
So
I
it sounds
guess
like not.
the way that I think of it as a possibility is not ever as a total annihilation. So
Okay.
what? Because I think your being has to continue to exist, from what I
Hmm.
understand. And so the way I understand it actually would be kind of a partial annihilation.
Hmm.
So where I disagree with Rooney is he would say, we each we're resurrected and then we're in God's presence, and those who are going to be glorified, that presence is beautiful. It's fulfilling and all that. And then those uh, who are evil and wickedness within them, all of that is kind of part of their being, and it's painful for something evil and dark and all that to be around pure light and goodness and all of that.
Hmm.
What I would say, where I would differ, is I think he gives that evil and darkness and sin kind of an eternal presence within the person. I would
Hmm.
say I don't think that can survive the light of God. I think it would burn away all of that to chaff, and it would just all of that part of you. Maybe like was it in the Grinch where he has this heart that's like really really small, and so maybe that's your true nugget left. In First Corinthians 3, I believe, where it talks about a lot of you you'll be saved, but as through fire, and a lot of what you built will be just burned away. So when you think about glory, resurrected to glory or shame, and an eternal punishment, I think the eternal punishment could be you'll be least you could have been this huge, very glorified version of yourself, but you're diminished because almost everything you were was burned away. And now you're just maybe a speck of of what you could have been, and you exist, but so it's not full annihilation. But I think I might differ with him with Rooney in that I don't know that evil and darkness and all that can just exist in the new creation by God forever. It kind of gives it an eternal state of being, when really those are all privations. They're evil's a privation of good. So it's not like coldness could exist next to a furnace after the heat is there.
Hmm.
Um, Evil's kind of something that once good is present, it just burns away as chaff. So does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. So is so I guess I would put a pin in the annihilationism thing to say that there's a lot of metaphysical difficulties, challenges, and complexity that I don't think we can sort out fully, but I think people should work on. And here's why. Because I mean, I believe in the convertibility thesis of good and being, hashtag the fourth way of Aquinas. I also think that we have to like use our will to receive God's activity of perfecting us, so that we have to be complicit in our sanctification to some extent, which means we get some type of goodness added to us in a way which allows us to be perfected. But for those in hell, the rejection of God and their eternal rejection of God would be an internal orientation against the reception of the good, which means they have an eternal orientation against the reception of being, which would be perfective. The question I have, which I don't think will be solved until hopefully I get to heaven, um, will be, what does that look like for somebody who's in eternally rejecting the perfections of being? And what does that leave them diminished to? So if their existence not retracted, but their perfections are rejected, what perfections are left? Because classically, we include perfections not just like, oh, I live a holy life, but your ability to see is a type of perfection which relates to you. So I'm not entirely sure what stays and what doesn't. So for the annihilationists who say, well, you're just like dust, it's like, okay, so I think what they're trying to say is you're minimally held in being. And that seems to fit with the rejection of God, who is being himself. So that's where I would just kind of put a little circle and a question mark and say, I think there's a limited way in which some type of annihilationism could kind of answer this. I don't know how. To kind of your point about hell, I'm just going to totally agree with a big section of this, which is Sheol and Hades, which I think the most accurate one is the grave. Like, totally correct. I also think that the grave is temporary, if what you mean by that is it's not the final state, because we get the resurrection, the general resurrection. Totally right. Where I don't know, I don't think we're going to disagree, but I'll clarify is then the death and hell is thrown into the lake of fire. And I think the lake of fire is most accurately called hell. So I would reserve hell for the lake of fire and the state that people persist in post general resurrection and judgment. And I would just use hell for that on, because I think that all the comments on Sheol and Hades are correct. I would also probably use hell for Gehenna, because kind of thinking through, I don't know of any temporary states which Gehenna describes. It seems to be pointing towards the eternal destiny. Now, you can fact check me on that, but it seems to be. Also, the hell, which is used to describe where the demons go, which borrows a Greek word, which is like Tartarus or something like that.
Tartarus. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, which is like their version of hell, seems to relate to the demons, and the demons are hanging out there forever. So I would use hell for that, Gehenna, lake of fire, and the state of one's eternal destiny. And I'd use grave for Abraham's bosom and for Hades, or Sheol in general, admitting that there's a divide. Um, as far as purgatory, I like that we've given it a different name. Most theologians seem to talk about it as the very upper section of hell, where it could be a divide. And I think that anybody who would say that, like, the hell that, or the burning flame that's passed through so you survive as through a burning building would be hell, I'd go, that's my favorite purgatory passage. I'd put that one for purgatory. Um, and same with the until you pay the last penny. I'm like, I would say purgatory there. If that implies a reversal, that once you pay the last penny, then you're set free. Anything with a temporary stay, which is hell like, I would put in purgatory. Just because it's Council of, no, not Council. Oh, it was Council of Ephesus condemns Origin, and it says you can't have like, I think it's Council 13 ish, somewhere around there. Which, and we can look it up. I mean, we could do things on the fly, but that one says, "Hey, hell for the devil and his angels forever. No post mortem repentance." And I think it says that it's just plain old forever there. That you can't then go to heaven, I think is the words. Um, where was I going with that? So when you talk about purification in hell, I mean, purification in purgatory, which is possibly part of hell, 100%. Yeah, totally. Purification in hell, I think most people who, I mean, I kind of lean more traddy conservative on this, would likely reject it, but they shouldn't. Because Aquinas gives a distinction here between type 1 and type 2 repentance. And he says that type 1 repentance would be, oh no, I offended God and broke my relationship with God, and for this I repent. He says that doesn't happen in hell, but they have type 2 repentance, which is, I don't know, to summarize as best I can, something like, I shouldn't have gotten this mess. Like, in light
Yeah.
of the punishment, it's like, this isn't good. This state of affairs whereby I offended God and received a punishment, circle the whole thing, bad. So it's not a repentance out of love of God, but it is actually something which I would say is medicinal for their souls, because a soul which recognizes they ought not be there in light of punishment, I think is in a better state than one which continues unpunished and unrecognizing the truth that what this state of separation with God is in fact bad. I think that's an improvement. So I wouldn't call that, I would call that type 2 repentance, and it's beneficial for the soul. And I would say it's also purifying for the soul, but it doesn't get them out of hell.
Yeah.
I don't know. What
I'm
do you
open
think
to
about
that.
that before I throw I throw one of my
Yeah.
potential solutions out?
I think that Jacques Maritain, I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but he
Hmm.
was a 20th century Catholic philosopher and did a lot of political philosophy. But he had a book right before he died called "Untrammeled Paths" or something like that. It's in French, but it's hard to find it, translations. But more and more people are kind of discussing one part of it, where he said, kind of over eternity. Um, that, like you said, they're not going to get out of hell, whatever hell means exactly. Like, if there is some line between heaven and hell, maybe it's the direction of your will is pointing, like you said, and people whose wills point this way and they can't ever have a will that points that way. Whatever it is, he's saying maybe over time are the prayers of the faithful, and maybe what's interesting to me, just quick sidebar, is in Revelation, where it says the gates will always be open and the leaves of the tree of life will be for the healing of the nations. I've sometimes wondered if that's almost like, we're a priestly people inside, the save the elect, the Christians inside of the new Jerusalem, kind of take those out to the people, almost where they don't have goodness within their souls. It almost has to be like as a grace given to them that can kind of heal, but they'll never be able to come into the kingdom. But Jacques Maritain's idea is over eternity, they gradually move to the limbus, the edge
Mm.
of hell. And so that's one solution. I'm actually open to a number of solutions. I'm not
Hmm.
like married to any of them, but I want to preserve God's goodness, because I think honestly that's the main thing to me is, if you describe a God who's especially sort of the unconditional election God, who's sitting there before he makes everything, and he says, I'm going to make a guy named Jake, and Jake's going to have no chance. I just want, for my own, show my power and my justice, just to show other people the difference between, good and bad, and mercy and, justice. I'm not going to give him efficacious grace. I'm not going to give him irresistible grace if you're Calvinist. Like those kind of ideas, I can't I can't reconcile that with goodness. If you had the ability to create conscious AI creatures or whatever, and you decided, I'm going to make 98% of them to just go crazy in this little, that they're conscious and they're feeling. I don't necessarily think we could ever create something that would
Sure.
have
Yeah.
those
Me
kind of
neither.
emotions, but I just think it would be a wrong thing to do if you could. So
Mm-hmm.
I just want, there's probably a number of solutions to reconciling a good God and the Catholic doctrines, but some of them clearly to me don't. And so the unconditional election versions, I think, are ones that don't reconcile it for me. What you're describing, maybe a state of pure natural happiness at the limbus that they gain over time through the prayers, but they'll never walk into the kingdom, and where priestly class is, in full appreciation of the beatific vision. Maybe they're deprived of that, and so that's the main the pain of loss or whatever that they're feeling. But at the same time, there really are things to enjoy about natural happiness and a mitigated goods, like relationships with other people, and
Mm-hmm.
all of
Mm-hmm.
that. So I think that's a perfectly good solution to me.
Okay.
The only
That's kind of
yeah,
neat.
go
I
ahead.
mean, so in the Summa, supplement 69, Thomas Aquinas says that there is good in hell, which should surprise a lot of people. I mean, he's not a squishy kind of theologian, so he says there are goods contained in hell. Now that's a supplement, so it's written by other people, pulling from his work and the spirit of Aquinas, but is directly thereafter. And I mean, hey, it's in the Summa. So, what you're saying, I think some people who are a little bit more on the right are going to be like, whoa, like goods in hell? Like, because you mentioned maybe the relationship with other peoples could be one of these goods. I don't think that's off the table. I mean, if there are goods in hell, why not that one? Um, I think, right? Now, the suggestion that they could be moving from a place of worse punishment out to the outer reaches, I don't know of anything that precludes that possibility off the top of my head. So, unless somebody knows like a council or a magisterial teaching that says that the state of punishment cannot be reduced in hell, and that doesn't exist, I don't think, or that they can't in some way be shifted in their orientation towards the goods that are on offer, I think that should be a live possibility. And I mean, Aquinas does write, and I think it's the main text of the Summa there, where I don't remember, it might be in the supplement, that says that the punishments of hell are not the maximum penalty, that God's mercy is operative on the souls in hell. So if we keep that in the picture, well, okay, so we have goodness exists in hell, hashtag Aquinas. God's mercy is operative, meaning that the maximum punishment is not always present in hell, Aquinas. To me, that fixes a lot, right? Because I mean, so far, we haven't even gotten that far in the conversation. And somebody might have started with the picture that we kind of painted to begin with, and it's kind of a caricature of everybody that goes to hell just morning and night, if there is a morning and night, and it's not a screaming throughout the night, tortured unendingly as much as possible. So far, Aquinas would say not as much as possible. No, it's not always torture because there are presence of goods. And we've put another possibility on the table that it could be that they could be in a place which the church already affirms is a possibility where there isn't so much pain. Council of Florence says that let him be anathema to say, I'm pretty sure it's an anathema, to say that the punishments in hell are equal. So they're not
I
equal.
was just gonna say.
So,
I was just
so
gonna
they're
say.
unequal
Yeah, go ahead.
pains. And so they're unequal pains. A pope later came along, Pope Pius the something and rather, said, added to that, said unequal punishments and in different places. And the scholastic tradition says that there's a difference between the pain of sense and the pain of loss. And you brought up limbo. That's where people said, well, maybe there's only the pain of loss, no pain of sense. And the loss is the super abundant gift that nobody could possibly earn or merit in any way. It's winning the lottery, and that is eternal union with God in the beatific vision, present in heaven for all eternity. So that would be the pain of loss. You just know that there's a lottery ticket that you could have scratched that got you heaven, but you didn't. You feel left out. My brother worked at a job where he gets there and he's like, "How come everybody's new except for this one guy?" And the manager said, because last year they all did a lottery pool and they bought lottery tickets
Mm,
and
nice.
they won, and everybody walked out and quit. And there's one guy who's like, "No, man, you ain't never gonna win that lottery. You're wasting
Oh,
your
he didn't
day."
get included.
Well, he was the only one left. So, did anybody come in and beat him with a stick? No. But did he see that he was left out of this incredible reward? Yeah. So he had pain of loss, no pain of sense, and there was no injustice done to him, right? He worked at that job and he received his just wages. When he did something wrong, maybe his boss said, bad, don't do that. But when he did something good, he was rewarded. This was fair, but he didn't win the lottery. He didn't get to walk out of that, right? So that's how I view another possibility of hell. And that one is like dead nuts down the line in the Summa, quite orthodox. I mean, we're quoting St. Thomas Aquinas, Council of Florence, Pope Pius the Whatchamwhosit, and that gets us a very different picture of hell. Not one that we had to be squishy on. No, one that we stayed tighter to the magisterium, and I think solves a lot of these problems.
What you're talking about with the different punishment levels,
Mm-hmm.
um, and also that there are goods in hell. I think
Mm-hmm.
logically there have to be goods. If you're saying this person has it worse than this person, well, in relation to what? In relation to being,
There you go.
God is
Yeah.
being, and so His being is goodness, truth, and beauty are the transcendent qualities of being. And so if you're
Beauty's
saying this,
beauty's debatable, but okay, keep going. Yep.
okay, oneness, I don't know, yeah, the one, the good, the beautiful. But if you're saying this person has it worse, they're less in being, you could say less in goodness.
Mm-hmm.
But if they have it worse than another person, that means in relation, that means they have to a degree the goodness more. This person has it more to the degree. So you could say in hell they have it, obviously to lesser degrees of being,
Mm-hmm.
um, and goodness. And then in heaven, it also talks about the least in the kingdom. And there are people who will be greatest or least in the kingdom. So that it kind of goes. So there's at some point there's a line where you don't get the beatific vision, but
Mm-hmm.
below that line, it's different relations to goodness and being, and then above it, it's still you still get the maybe beatific vision, but it's still mitigated. So it's kind of a big spectrum almost of relation, different degrees of relation to goodness and being, with a hard line in there somewhere for whether or not you get the uh, get the beatific vision. I don't know. So something related to that might be uh, space salvi. I talk about this one a lot because I think it's key for maybe the modern church's understanding of it a bit. But it's Pope Benedict XVI book, Hope Saves, Space Salvi, and about from 44 to 48 paragraphs is a very interesting read on this, because he talks about how um, if you have a heart that is completely open to love and goodness and truth, that means you are prepared to go straight to heaven, a saint.
Mm-hmm.
If you
Yep.
have a heart that is totally closed to love and truth and goodness, he says that will be there. And he says that person is closed off, and that's what the church calls hell. But he says this is, I think, a pretty major statement. He says, but as we know, in our daily life walking around, we do not meet many people of the first or last, those first two
Yeah, yeah.
categories. We
Mm-hmm.
don't
Mm-hmm.
meet many people who are entirely closed off to goodness and truth, nor do we meet many people who are entirely open to it. He says, the great majority. So to me, it's almost like he's countering St. Augustine's Massa
Yeah.
Damnata a
Uh-huh.
bit. He says the great majority have it to some degree. And then he brings up the 1 Corinthians 3, where in our um, appearance before the presence of God in judgment, those people will have all of their the parts of them that have been closed off burned away, but then they'll be saved as through fire. And then he talks about how that's purgatory. So it seems like what he's saying in there is that really there's you could say people are closed off in certain acts, but there's certain maybe degrees to which they had fullness of knowledge, complete consent. Those
Mm-hmm.
might be higher bars, maybe it sounds like he's saying, than we've thought. Maybe the 17-year-old kid who, as a Catholic, to some degree, and he goes to confession for the 100th time this year for masturbating or something. Not to
Mm-hmm.
bring up that topic, but that's a very, from talking to priests, that's maybe the most common thing for a lot of young men to just recurringly come back. I don't know if that is a complete consent of their will and completely closing themselves off to something, or if they are just struggling with a particular sin and they're losing, as Paul says. He's doing the thing that he doesn't want to do and not doing the things he wants to do, and we all struggle with our wills and conquering them. And maybe until you have that complete deliberate consent of your will rejecting God, that there's, like I was saying about the Grinch, this way down there, if you keep zooming in, there's maybe a tiny bit of openness that's being overpowered by a lack of openness. And
Hmm.
maybe when you're face to face with God, all of that other chaff gets burned away, and you could be saved as through fire, but definitely would need purgatory and would be the least in the kingdom.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, magisterial teaching would certainly say, die in a state of mortal sin, go to hell. However, what you're bringing up is okay, right? But mortal sin requires, full knowledge, deliberate consent, and grave matter. All right, your example, grave matter, sure, right? Um, Deliberate consent, no, their will is not exactly like, come on, they're teenagers, they have a flood of hormones, they may be addicted to this. Any of these sins could be mitigated by the fact that their flesh is warring against them and that their soul is oriented towards the good. But this isn't like breaking friendship with God, it's weakness and it's not malice. So we can say in the church is taught that that okay, getting drunk, that's a sin. You're an alcoholic and your will is compromised, then you can't give deliberate consent. Now at that point you say, well, are you trying to get help? Right? We move to kind of the meta level, or maybe somebody who has no knowledge of a particular sin being evil or being serious, or doesn't understand the teaching behind it. Like people who say, well, I don't understand the church's teaching on contraception. Okay, well, if they do not understand, that does actually mitigate their responsibility. So with mortal sin, if it's a mortal sin and you die in a state of mortal sin, then you go to hell. That part is clear. The part that's unclear is what is a mortal sin. And we know the grave matter part, that's clear. We don't know the extent of one's understanding because that would make us a mind reader, nor do we know the extent of their will's choice because that would make us a heart reader. So those two things are a little bit where I would push back though is, people say, well, are many or few saved? I'm in the, oh, very few are saved. Totally with good old St. Augie here, Massa Damnata. And my main reason is when I read the most clear passage, and that would be, I think there's one Luke and one in Matthew, where the disciples go, hey, Jesus, are many or few saved? It's like, okay, cool. This is our exact question. And he's like, yeah, it's like narrow gate, few will be saved, many will go to destruction. So when he uses word, if it was like, I guess if he said, well, many will go to the fire, but some will go to everlasting, reward or beatific vision, I'd go, okay, fire squishy, because that could mean either purgatory or it could mean hell. It's all fire, man. But if he says like destruction or something more like that, and I'm 95% sure I remember what he was saying, but I'd have to double check the verse. I'd say, okay, that doesn't describe purgatory. So we would have to say that he's saying salvation is your eventual destination, and he's speaking not of the grave proximate, but of one's destination ultimate. At which point I think he's answered it clearly. And that's the point where I go, okay, I can speculate. I can read the scripture. It seems clear to me. But good thing I'm Catholic and I can lean on more things than just my sola scripturaness. I can bring in the fathers. And when I read the way that the fathers read it, I mean, it's pretty much unanimous where they're like, if you read St. Augustine on that passage, he goes, yeah, many means many, few means few. Clearly answered, Bob's your uncle. So that's where I go with that one. I'm like, okay, I'm pretty
Can I push
darn
back on that a little
sure.
bit?
Yeah. Please do, because I haven't heard any really great response. I feel like you might have one up your sleeve. What do you think?
I think that at its face, from especially from a modern reader or from Augustine, who wasn't necessarily part of the Greek world or the Hebrew world, I think that seems to be just on the face of it what it's saying.
Sure. Yeah.
From reading a little bit on the Jewish concepts of the day
Mm-hmm.
on two there's the present age, which is
Mm-hmm.
being destroyed. It's ruled by the devil. It's uh everybody's going to their death and destruction. And then the age to come, which they saw as going to be the age of God. He's going to make all things right.
Right.
Um, a lot of the way the Jews saw it was, you're going to be resurrected into that after being destroyed. You're going to be resurrected into that new world, and there's a book on another Brad Peacher one, I guess, but he it's on the Paul, a New Testament Jew, but he's talking about a lot of the Jewish concepts, and he's saying uh, the Christian kind of insight to that was that age to come has kind of a Venn diagram overlap a little bit with
Mhm.
the current age, that maybe people didn't expect a breaking in of the age to come into the current age. And so when there's frequent allusions to everybody going to destruction, or even Paul says, yeah, this guy's being trouble, let him go to destruction, he'll be saved later on the day of judgment. Give him over
Well,
to
that's an
Satan.
interesting one. Okay.
Give him over to Satan, he'll be fine, but he'll be saved on the day of judgment or whatever. But they didn't necessarily see that Apolloni of this age going to destruction as something about um, your eternal. So there's sort of there's going to be a day of judgment and of wrath and of a bunch of terrible things that you might have to experience, but not necessarily passing from one age to the other age. It, you know, um, I have something else to say on that, I guess. Oh, the other part is the language. I push back a little bit on the few will be saved, because the Greek is. I've seen people discuss this, point out that it's an are being saved. Few are being,
Mhm.
um, and so it's a bit more an allusion maybe to, yes, in this world as it is, before I've completely broken in and given my body and shown that the age to come is being brought in, few are being saved in this, age of destruction. Everybody's going to destruction. And it's not necessarily like according to your old Jewish paradigms. Yeah, you do need this breaking in of God, and few are being saved, but I don't necessarily see it as and therefore at the resurrection, most will be judged harshly. Does that make sense? There's sort of that two ages, this world and the world to come, this age and the age to come. And yeah, destruction, because there's a lot of allusions to destruction. Apolloni, like uh, the coin, it can mean lost too. Like the coin is lost, Apolloni. That one's not destroyed, but they use the same word, Apolloni, as well as the prodigal son. He's lost, he's destroyed in that sense, I guess. But then he comes back. So it's not always going to destruction, isn't always a place you don't come back from, like the prodigal son.
Okay. Okay. So I think that so I guess in my argument it was, if it relates to the end state, then it runs through fine. However, you're saying it doesn't relate to your end state, it relates to the grave, in which there is a future resurrection after that. So let me see if I can make this make sense here. Now, there's a divide, we know, at death that you can't cross. So you would say that what Jesus was claiming was there's many and few. The many go to the bad side of the grave. The few go to the good side of the grave. And then if we bring in the parable where it said they can't cross from one to another, then the many can't trickle on over to the few side, the good side. But there's the age to come, which includes the general resurrection. The many who were on the bad side, who presumably stayed on the bad side, who have the general resurrection, what happens to them? Like, are you saying that are you saying A, are there still many on that side? And if not, why not? And two, do the many get an opportunity? Because that seems like a post mortem conversion if they get an opportunity to go from bad side people to good side people. Or would you say, I know there's a lot of options. I feel like I should put them up
Yeah.
on the screen somehow. I guess I'm thinking it through. Well, let's just start there. Okay. So would you say that Jesus's parable would say that many go to the bad side of Sheol. Is that what he was saying?
Yeah, because I think in my understanding, a lot of Gehenna
Uh-huh.
and I would say probably vast majority of people go to Gehenna in some sense after they die
Okay.
for
Okay.
purification. That's kind of what Pope Benedict, I think, was saying. The great majority go there, and
Mhm.
we need destruction. It's gonna, we need
Right.
all the things from this age need to be destroyed. And so I think it's almost too, the analogical thinking of like we can be connected to something, participate in this or in that. We're going to be participating, most of us. There are edge cases, I think, obviously, but to some degree, we're either participating in a resurrection to glory or resurrection to shame.
Okay.
And
I
and
don't
then
mean to
for
interrupt you,
most of
but
us,
I think it
I
clicks.
think we do go to Gehenna, a place of burning destruction. But I don't think we're entirely. We have some participation, most of us, in the good. And so at the resurrection, we get I think, all the other things are not present in us, and only what is good will be able to be in the new creation. And um yeah, I don't, I think for some of us it'll be kind of a shame because you'll see that person wasn't really apparently their character was not what we thought. It was very low. It was so very
Mhm.
little good passes into the next world.
So I think what you're meaning clicked. And tell me if this is what you mean. When Jesus says many will go to destruction, few will be saved, you would say that the many would encompass those who require destruction of purgatory and those that require that whatever mode of destruction happens in like hell, by which we mean the hell which people just hang out forever.
Yeah.
So when we talk about destruction, it's talking about the destruction of things which bring about some type of repentance. And then there's type 1 and type 2 repentance. So those being destroyed, those who were always oriented to God are the type who were type 1 repentant. I'm sorry, I broke friendship with God, which means their orientation at death was always to God, but through the destructive fires of purgatory to meet him. And then there's those who only have type 2 repentance, which is brought about only through the punishment of hell, which does not bring about eventual entrance into heaven. However, we can talk about this as many destroyed, in that the combination of all those who go into purgatory plus all that those that go into hell is many in comparison to those who immediately enter God's glory, which would be pretty much the saints, and that's it. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I because I think
Okay.
it makes sense that somebody like the prodigal son, he's
Mhm,
going to his destruction. Does that mean that he
mhm.
can't come back out of it? Because those people who are purged in pain and then are then come back out, those would be people that are in purgatory. But maybe those who are lost, who are being lost, I think the more present active sense of it, uh, some of them will have their character, their being that is formed on this in this age of destruction will be destroyed, but then they'll pass through as through fire, where others, you know, at least the possibility is there. I add a little hopeful universalism in that I pray that
Mhm.
nobody has a state where they have definitively closed themselves off and entirely to hell. I don't know. I can't really say whether that hope is you know a one that's likely to occur or not. But I just wouldn't want eternal suffering on anybody. But
Right.
that yeah, those that are lost, destroyed, Apolloni will be a lot of them will seem to uh, at the other end of the resurrection be able to uh, have some level of glory in the next world when they're resurrected. Um, but not not if they had committed a what is definitively a mortal sin. Those
Mhm.
would stay um, stay
Okay.
in a separation. I guess the question to me is, what does this separation look like? If we're just really trying to imagine it, because
Mhm.
as Father Rooney described, as a lot of the early fathers described, if God is a fiery presence, and
Mhm.
those who are good are in the presence of that fire, um, and enjoying it, and those who have a character that's um, not aligned with Him, it's a very painful process, or just existence. What does that look like? Because for Father Rooney, those people are interacting with each other. He was saying, it'll almost be like my brother with cancer is here, and the cancer is sort of the state of hell, the state of, but we'll be able to care for them and interact with them. And um, whereas I feel like maybe traditionally there's a lot of people who looked at hell as like a different place. So it wasn't necessarily like we're all around in this new creation with God. Uh, but the other model, maybe more Western model, is there's these two completely different places that are separated from one another rather than all of us being around a fiery presence. I don't
Right,
know,
and
which do you think those are contradictory,
I have no
or
idea
they
what
both
place.
work at some level?
I don't know what place means when we're talking about the afterlife. I don't know what time means. Actually, I have some hints, but I'll send you a time paper if you're interested. But I have some hints about what time might look like in the afterlife. But that's one of those things that here's the only distinction I would make. I'm totally fine with the Eastern, hell and heaven are really one's orientation to the presence of God. That seems fine. I don't have a big issue with that. However, the distinction I would make is I wouldn't put everything on a gradient. Like you're more turned towards God, you're less turned to God, because that puts a lot of the onus on us. Whereas I think that the union, which is just affected by Christ, is something which goes over and above our orientation to God. Because let's say you were perfectly oriented to God, you had never sinned, and you always had the hope of being united with God. You did everything right, okay? But Christ's work had never happened. What do you think happens then? It's like, well, you couldn't have possibly merited union with God in the beatific vision. That's completely beyond your power. So that's why I would say the divide isn't like a line that we draw on a continuum of orientation to God. It's more. I would say if everybody went to okay. Here's my hot take. I don't know. It's hot take because it's about hell apparently. Um, it would be totally just if God sent every single person to hell without exception, except for the Virgin Mary because she didn't have original sin and personal sin. But that's a more complicated one. We'll put her to the side because that gets confusing. I think everybody else can go to hell, and if we
Hey,
got there, we would go. Yeah, this seems about right. Like all the things that I've done wrong, all the things that I've done right, if you take them all in balance, I think if I got to hell, I'd go, yeah, 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 yeah. No, no, this is about good. There are some goods here. There are some punishments here. God's a loving father. That is his character, and that's non-negotiable. He knows me more than I know myself. Mhm. Yep. Seems about right. Maybe I wouldn't be thrilled with being there. But I think that we could run that continuum of orientation to God and fit every single person there in hell without injustice. And that it would kind of be like in that job that my brother was working at, we could fit every single employee on the pay scale and they'd go, yeah, that's fair. But heaven is somebody gave you a lottery ticket that wins. Now it's not complete. There's an extent. The chance aspect of lottery gets a little, confusing. All analogies break down, but that's how I view it. I think it's like a completely I know you agree it's completely unmerited, the grace of heaven, but I would stress that. And I don't know if you want to pivot to a few of I can sketch out kind of some of my solutions and we'll kind of switch hats here where you kind of laid out some of yours
uh,
and I kind of probed. If you want to get any,
this is I might want to push back slightly though,
go for it.
um, and that this might be an area where I push up against heresy or something. But
Okay. All right.
the idea that we all deserve hell including people who were born before Christ but
Mhm.
lived really great lives trying to pursue. I think we're dropped in a pretty confusing, often painful world. And
Mhm.
we didn't really ask to be here. So at one level, I want to give humanity, stick up for humanity a little bit. And, Israel are those who wrestle with God and those who
Mhm.
ask
Mhm.
sort of audacious questions sometimes and say, do I deserve hell? Like one thing that came to my understanding recently is that about 50%, I saw this on PubMed where they discuss, medical things, between 50 and 70% of embryos that are conceived. I know we both believe life starts at conception,
Totally.
do not make it through the natural pregnancy process. They die before. So that's a lot of embryonic waste, they call it, that naturally happens. So thinking of that's a life that does not get baptized, that gets, and Augustine's thinking, given punishments of some kind.
Uh-huh.
Why? Why are they given
Well,
punishments? And also, yeah, it's just like if there. I guess that to me sounds like a um, trying to regain my thought a little bit. It's just, I guess, discovering that is similar to this book that I was reading, Salvation Outside the Church by Francis Sullivan. He was talking about how we've had this doctrine of sufficient grace, that every single person has grace sufficient to go to heaven, that God gives them at least the possibility. And we've also had this doctrine of no salvation outside the church. And before we discovered the new world, there was this idea that, well, everybody has sufficient grace because if they respond well to the sufficient grace given to them, God will send a missionary, even if they're on a
mhm.
desert island. If you respond well to that grace, God will find you and he'll make sure you make it into the church because everybody, it's only fair that because he wills the salvation of all. There's a couple verses that they've used for that. So, like Aquinas' perspective, and a lot of Thomas was, he'll find a way to make you part of the church if you respond to it. But then when they found the new world, he says, that was this huge shock to them that our ways of thinking of making these two doctrines reconciled no longer makes sense, really,
Mm.
because there's this whole continent, two continents full of people that maybe if they responded, are we saying that nobody on these two continents ever responded positively to
Right.
sufficient grace? And
Right.
so they started to reformulate it to where there's more idea of invincible ignorance, got the idea of that got bigger, the idea of implicit baptism of desire, implicit faith. And so my pushback on the idea of people before Christ don't really have the chance at the lottery ticket, the beatific vision. Well, maybe if they truly had sufficient grace that they could respond to, and there is, putting the like Feeneyite position aside of it's impossible for them to respond positively to that, or that you have to actually be physically inside the church. I don't see why not. I almost see the discovery of the embryonic waste is almost as big of a discovery as of the new world, and that we just
Okay.
found another huge group of human beings that how are they? Do they really have sufficient grace? Because if we really believe that all humans have that, I think it's an Ott, his Fundamentals of Dogma, where he has a part trying to understand that, and he says there is a position that maybe God just gives them all kind of heals their original sin. That's one way to solve it for unbaptized babies that die. But yeah, that's a lot. But I'm just trying to think of there's a lot of people that don't seem to have been, if you have a more strict view on it, given much of a chance. And so sometimes I wonder, do they really? They're thrown into circumstances where they're a slave to sin. They're fairly ignorant. They're looking at the world as through glass darkly.
Mhm.
What do we deserve? I mean, I think we'll get what we deserve because God is just. So I'm not going to doubt that because he's good and he's just. But I don't think he owes me grace per se. But it's
Mhm.
like he creates me in a position where I suffer eternally and in this world and the next if I don't receive grace. So there might be a level of he created me for this and he's good. So and he wants to save me. So why wouldn't he,
Mhm.
make
Yeah.
this grace available?
I think it is, right? Like, I think we're 100% agreement that, sufficient grace is offered to everybody such that if they responded to it, they have a real chance of salvation. Like, that's what Lumen Gentium or something. 100%. The people before Christ, they had an orientation to God. They didn't have means of being united with God yet, not through Christ. So they die in a state which leaves them in Abraham's bosom, and they were oriented towards accepting Christ, which is why when Christ descends into hell, he's like, "Hey guys, like, remember you were all oriented towards me? You didn't know who I was yet, but now that you
Okay, I
know."
misunderstood you.
Right, then he leads them up into heaven. So no, I think we're 100% in agreement there.
I
I
misunderstood that
guess.
point. I didn't know you meant that. Okay.
Gotcha. Yeah, I kind of get, so I guess the way I view it is there's two things going on that resolve hell for me. One is, I think we're way worse than we think, and I'll kind of give a few reasons for that. And two is, I think hell's not as bad as we think, which sounds kind of, to some ears, like, wait a minute, you can't tell me that hell's not that bad. It's like, listen, I'm trying to just go straight down the scriptural and I know you are too, magisterial track as possible. And this is the way I see it playing out. On one side, we have, and we kind of talked about, hell's not as bad as you might have in your imagination, because Aquinas says there's still goods in hell, which come as a surprise to a lot. Florence says that the punishments are not equal. Pope Pius says that you're punished in different places. The scholastic tradition says that there's a difference between pain of sense and pain of loss. A lot of those who comment on limbo, and I haven't made up my mind about all that stuff. I don't know what God does with babies, okay? But we do see that the possibility is they could live in a place like the Garden of Eden. And the Garden of Eden did not have the connection to God like we have through Jesus Christ. But I don't think anybody would say, how dare God put Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden? I'd be like, wow, I mean, dude, the Garden of Eden was kind of great, dude. It had all the natural goods, but it lacked at that point the connection to God through Jesus Christ by means of his church, which is on offer to us. So Adam and Eve would look at us and be jealous. Be like, what? You're going to get that? Now, that's why I'm like, if that counts as hell because there's pain of loss, oh, I don't deserve the Garden of Eden. Like, no possible way do I deserve that. And if that is the very upper limit, I don't think anybody reaches that anyway. And if the lower limit's like how bad Satan gets it, I'm like, yeah, we all fit. So that's why that my first kind of big thing is hell is not always as bad as we think it is. There's type 2 repentance, says Aquinas. There's God's active mercy also. So maybe we've just kind of blown up what God's actually doing to us. And, maybe if you just paint that picture and you say, is that in line? Does that do it by itself? Like, if God's a loving father, yes, he punishes, he chastises those he loves. If he still loves those in hell, he is chastising them. They do receive mercy. They do receive goods. I'm actually really interested by the possibility you brought up that they could kind of wiggle their way to the better parts of that. I mean, if in the end we were in heaven enjoying the supernatural gift of salvation plus all natural goods, and they had rejected God throughout their life in all the ways that he revealed them, and end for eternity in a place like the Garden of Eden, I'm like, dude, that's a better state than I think. I mean, come on. If that's on the table, and I haven't thought of that, and I like that, and boy, does that solve things, then cool. But the other side of the equation to me is I think we're way worse than we think. And there's a few things that we see. One is when the angels get created, like Augustine says, that's the let there be light moment, and they instantly dart to or away from God. And one of the ways that we could spell that out is they're only a combination of an essence and an existence without a material form, without a material body. So it's like they're kind of like just a soul, which is the principle of actuality. And their potentiality comes from they don't contain within themselves the reason for their own existence because they're not God. So they're a composite being of a potential and act, but not in the same way that we are. So as a result, upon the moment of their being granted existence, It's just like bang, they just flick to one state or another. We don't do that. We're material creatures that move step by step in time. But I'm like, well, what happens when we're loosed from our material bodies? What happens when our soul is just unencumbered by the material world, the way the time works, whatever else? I think we probably dart to or away from God. And I think it happens really fast because that's the way it worked with the angels. Not that we are angels afterwards, but like there's an analogy here. And I know that when I see people through the incredibly short 100 years that somebody's on earth, there are some people that take very slow, plodding steps towards being evil. And even in a short period of time, you can still be Hitler in that period of time. If you make your journey in the direction of evil and away from God, you can get to Hitler, man, real quick. So, what happens when we get a direction for or against at like supernatural speed, loosed from the body? I don't know. Maybe people who we saw slowly moving towards vice go at it at the speed of light and they become unrecognizable. And that's their final state. And it's dictated by them and their free choice. So that's one possibility. The other thing is God makes us and calls creation very good. So I think that the actual material world is good and restrains us from becoming more evil. I know some, Gnostics think the world is evil and restrains us from being more good. I think the reverse is true. And that being in these good bodies, being in this good world, being with others, having a church on earth, all this stuff keeps us back from being more evil and might kind of hide what we're really like if we were unencumbered. And we see this when we take some of the goods of the world away, like in situations of natural disasters where the good of ever-present food is gone. What happens? People fight and steal and murder and kill. Or you see people trample each other when running away from a fire. It's like, ooh. So that's another kind of piece. The other thing is, I think our guardian angels are really good at their job. And I don't think it's just like, oh, I didn't get in that traffic wreck. It's like they're really concerned about the good of our eternal souls. I had a friend back in high school, and he was he was a good guy. He was known as like a really good kid, but he always was kind of like kind of dabbling in stupid decisions. And I was the one to be like, dude, that's really dumb. Like, kind of holding him back a little bit. And then I go off to college and he goes off. And I go, how's my old friend doing? Oh, he knocked up his girlfriend. He was homeless. And like, I'm like, good night. Like, as soon as like that little restraining influence of me was gone, bang to vice. His angel's better than me, right? Vastly more powerful. So I wonder, like, okay, like I know there's people in my life that restrain me from evil. When I think of doing something dumb, I like text them. I'm like, convince me out of it now. And they help me. So what's my angel doing? So when we say, oh, I love my friend Bob, it's like, do you love your friend Bob as such? Or do you love the Bob who has been so heavily influenced, corrected, curbed, and strengthened by his guardian angel, such that he reflects some of the goodness of God himself, irrespective of his own choice, but because of the help of that angel? I don't know, right? That's an I don't know. Another thing is we have the saints praying for us. We have the grace of the church being pumped into us somehow, especially if we're in full union. So that grace is upholding us and strengthening us to be able to make good use of our freedom. The angels are helping us. The good world's helping us. Um, I don't know what else is going on. Maybe God's zapping some holiness. The work of the Holy Spirit. I think that we're looking around saying we're pretty good. And it seems like it. Like you quoted that one fellow who said most people seem to be in the middle. Like, yeah, but
Pope
when we,
Benedict.
yeah, Pope Benedict. Okay. And I think he's right. But the question is why? If the why is because people's wills are truly oriented to love and friendship with God, to the contempt of all else for eternity. Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, heaven's more full than I thought, man. But if the answer is what I suspect, that no, our wills are tainted by the pain of original sin, lest we're baptized, um, that we have concupiscence, that we are wicked, that every thought and intention of the heart is evil and all the time, Proverbs or Psalms or whoever says something such. and we don't really know each other, right? And that some of our intuitions about the goodness of others are actually intuitions about the goodness of God and his action through the saints in his church and his angels, and not about our friends and neighbors. So when I put these two together, I think we are worse than we think, and that our path is likely away from God, and we haven't trod it far enough. And that hell is way more merciful and good and has a better upper bound than we think. When I put those together, I'm like, yeah, 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 makes sense to me. And then you add on what we were talking about earlier, that there's a way out. Like, yeah, we're evil and we're going to go to a place where an all knowing, all good, and merciful God punishes us to the exact degree, which is exactly just, if anything, on the lower end. Well, that seems reasonable. And if there was always floating next to us a proverbial flotation device that we could grab at any time and God prompts us to do exactly that, then if we never grabbed onto it and we never responded to the real grace that's on offer, then all the injustice claims to me evaporate. We're paid according to our works, hashtag Paul, and we were given the opportunity. I mean, God just held the lottery ticket and was like, scratch it now. And we didn't, and we just took our payment instead. Okay. I don't know. That resolves. What do you think? That was a lot. I probably threw more different points at you than vice versa. And I know I forgot half the things you
Yeah,
said. Um,
that's what I was trying to jot down a couple things because I had a couple things in there I wanted to
okay.
respond to about us being more evil. I do think that's true that we are completely reliant on God for anything good. Anything good that will come out of us is because he created us, so we have some natural um,
Mhm.
drive towards good, and that's corrupted in original sin. But I don't think we're totally depraved like a Calvinist would think. We still have some um, created goodness in us, and then grace is, I believe, kind of ever present. I might
Mhm.
have a more wide view of grace than maybe some Catholics, where I don't think it's necessarily God just choosing certain very specific people to get it in specific moments. I think it's he's kind of trying to interact with us with through truth, beauty, and goodness, through his being, through life itself, in just a variety of ways that we're constantly interacting with. Can we do good or bad in this situation? And we have constant opportunities to resist or accept goodness and truth and beauty. So, but I would say there maybe some of it is my background in that I did rebel against Christianity pretty young in fifth grade, and I went down a
Mhm.
pretty bad path in that I knew people like many people like the one you said who just
Yep.
did you know uh, a lot of people I knew were got into drugs and ended up dying of overdoses or suicide
Mhm.
and or going just to this day being severe alcoholics or things like that. So it's not uncommon for me to get a call that like, oh, this person that we all grew up with, they just
Mhm.
another one's passed away, kind of thing. And I just think about a lot of their lives where at some level it's not totally surprising how some of them ended up. I also would think of um, there's this YouTube channel I like. It's kind of depressing, but it's called the
Is it this
soft white.
channel? No, I'm kidding.
No, it's called the soft white underbelly, and
Okay.
it's very popular. But basically, this guy he's at Skid Row in L.A. and he'll just take in drug dealers, pimps, prostitutes,
Mhm.
a lot of very severe addicts, and sometimes he talks to people in prison or who've been in gangs or in prisons, and just has like a high quality interview with them. Tell me about your upbringing, your life. Tell me about. And they're fascinating because it's crazy what little children have to go through in life.
Mm. Oh,
Just
yeah.
almost all of the women who are prostitutes were like, well, my mom just sold me to a pimp when I was 7 years
Mhm.
old,
Mhm.
and
Oh, yeah.
or all the he's had a lot of porn stars on where and it's almost all of them to a person were abused sexually by an uncle, by a dad. We're in the foster care system, and the foster care ones are especially. It's like so many of the people living on the street were in the foster care system. So a lot of the really we go to the lowest we think of that are really doing terrible things. Especially when he goes and talks to some gang members, like there's these Aryan Nation guys in prison he's interviewed, and other gangs, and they're like, one guy said it, for all of us, there was a point where we decided that human life has no value. And for him, it was just the way he was raised. He had a heroin addict dad who abused him and left him in a parking lot. And he saw his brother die in front of his eyes. And then when
Wow.
he had to basically kill or be killed in a bunch of different situations. And then he's decided basically life has no value. If I don't kill these other people, they're going to kill me. And so at a level, a lot of the most evil, I don't want to, excuse it. You know what I mean? Because at a level there, but it's at least understandable to me that I don't have to live like that. I wasn't abused to that degree. I mean, I went down a
Mhm,
bad path,
mhm.
mostly for existential reasons, where I couldn't see how life made sense, and I gave up and that kind of thing. But some people are go down those roads because not that it's often because they're very, very hurt by they're
Yeah.
abandoned by their family, and they're sexually abused and physically abused, told that they don't matter, kicked out of the house at such a young. So that's a long way of just saying I really have a heart for people who seem to be the absolute worst, even though they're often harmed to a degree. You can't really, oh, I'm just going to help them and they'll be better. Most of them are probably not going to get better. Like, they a lot of times you help a prostitute, and then they say a lot of them go back to their pimps once you let them go out of these therapy programs, or drug addicts. 90+% of fentanyl addicts relapse immediately. So a lot of them are stuck, and but I still have sympathy that they're stuck in a place where they are slaves to sin, as Paul says. They
Mhm,
are their chains are so thick. Some of us are, I think, fortunate that we have much easier chains to break out of um, than some of these other people who are, I don't think, due to anything they've done, just put with the thickest chains with weights on them, and just said, "Okay, little kid, go out there and try to be a good person, and maybe God will have mercy on you." And I
yeah,
think God's, as Jesus showed, he had super abundant grace on the lowest. He would spend his time with them. So I do have a feeling that even though a lot of us are horrible, he
mhm,
does have a lot of mercy on those situations, and um he doesn't want to give us the worst. As you said, he has mercy. He doesn't have to give us the judgments that are the harshest. He can give us less merciful. So I guess also I was going to say I like your method of I guess there's different methods where people debate on this of more hopeful attitudes, and they people compare the Jacques Maritain one, which sounds a little bit more like what you're saying, where people are in hell, but maybe it's not quite as bad as we think,
mhm,
versus the Balthazar one, which is no, they're not going to be in hell at all. They're going to be in heaven, and we can hope for that. I think either of those, to me, as long as we uphold that God is good, and that
mhm.
he's not only just in some harsh way, but he's merciful, and that we are his creations. He knit us in the womb. He loves us. As long as we can really look at our vision of God, and not betray that. I think there's a few options, and I actually, I like the Martin way of maybe the people in hell. It won't be that bad. Maybe over time they can come to a limbus at the edge of hell. Maybe the beatific vision is just a Willy Wonka golden ticket that only a few get, and then everybody else. It's not like they get just a pool of lava to sit in all day. It's they get something else a little better than that. Maybe a couple people get that. So that's to me that's a good answer. And then I do think the Balthazar answer, or the Pope Benedict answer, which is more similar, sounds like where just it's easier to get to the other side of the gates than we might have imagined. We're not going to say there's mortal sins impossible or there's not a place called hell or of like a separation from God, but just that maybe more people get in than we had previously presumed. Maybe the 70% of embryos that aren't even born, God gives them sufficient grace, and do they even have the ability to reject it? So maybe it's just kind of an automatic healing of the original sin.
Yeah.
There's possibilities there, and but yeah, to reiterate, I just think the main thing is we don't create systematic theology that makes God into a monster sitting there planning out who to give grace to, who not to give grace to, because I think that often comes down to Adam and Eve with some of these systems. If to do good, you need efficacious grace from God, an actual grace that isn't just sufficient, but is kind of actualized in our wills. Um, they have to kind of say that Adam and Eve weren't given that in that moment of the fall, because if that moment of decision, if you receive efficacious grace, it's 100% certain in that system of Banez Thomism that you will do the right thing. You will be saved. You will choose grace. So I've asked many of them, so what does that mean for the Garden of Eden? Did God kind of cause the fall in a way by just saying, I'm not going to give efficacious grace to Adam and Eve, and so they won't be able to do the good? And I
Yeah.
think that's a dark way of looking at God. I mean, a lot of those kind of systems where hell is a place of extreme torment that God planned for most of us to go to. I just, I don't think we need to believe that as Catholics. And I personally, it doesn't compute at a moral or ethical or, heart level for me.
Right. Normally when I hear somebody who's like, I just can't be Christian because of hell, I go, ready? On your mark, get set, tell me everything you know about hell. They go, well, and I go, nope, 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 nope. We don't know that. We don't know that. We don't know that. And really, what the message I typically want to send is what we do know is the character of God, who reveals himself as a loving father again and again and again. That if your issue is, but I love my Aunt Sally and I worry she's in hell, stop worrying about that because God loves your Aunt Sally so much more than you do, so much more than you could, that if you're worried that God doesn't have enough love in his heart for your loved one, wrong. Now, how does this play out? I don't know. I don't know what hell is like. I don't know what the levels are like. I don't know what goodness works like that. I don't know what God's mercy looks like. I don't really know what type 2 repentance looks like in hell. I also don't know if they can move around in hell. I don't know how bad they were. I don't know what else is going on. I don't know so much about hell that I just have to say, I'm going to put a big question mark. Another thing is, I don't know how time moves in hell. My personal opinion is it moves incredibly slowly. So if you had one punishment, it could potentially last for an incredible amount of time, such that, okay, you're punished with a slap on the wrist, which takes a billion years to actually complete, whereas somebody else could be punished with a much different punishment that also takes a while to complete. I don't, we just don't know so much about it. So instead of interpreting God's character in light of this incredibly difficult, tangled, unclear theology of hell, I would much rather interpret hell in light of the clear theology of God's nature as a father. And I think the pieces line up in many different ways. If you take my people are worse and hell is better view, then the character of God would predict that perfectly fine. If we can have scripture is mainly talking about the grave, and then we need to see the more minimal passages talking about post resurrection in light of the way kind of you were describing, and then we can make room for more people on the right side. Well, that fits with the character of God. So there are solutions which fit with the character of God. My big problem is when people think they know exactly how hell works. They
Yeah.
think that everybody's just getting love all the time. And it's like, dude, you have no basis for that. Right? Like to just be so certain about that such that you can toss like the 1,000 times God reveals himself as a good and loving father. Like toss out the fact that when God became man, he showed he'd rather suffer for you than let you go to hell. Where the heck were you on that part of the passage? So it just understand what's uncertain by what is certain. And that's like my big takeaway. Um, as far as I haven't made my decision up about what happens to unbaptized babies. If I was to take a bet right now, I might bet they just all go to heaven, and here's why. Um, a lot of Protestants who reject baptismal regeneration will point to the thief on the cross and say, "Was he baptized?" No, he wasn't. And we go, "Well, he was baptized with the baptism of desire," and so, and that's a great response. But I think there's an even better one, which is prior to the crucifixion, Jesus says to his disciples, "Can you be baptized by the baptism that I'm going to be baptized by?" And what's the referent? His crucifixion and death, right? Because that's the baptism he's talking about. Okay, so what happened at his crucifixion and death? Well, the penalty and consequences of sin came upon him such that he died. And this counts as a baptism. Oh, hmm. Why do the unbaptized babies die? That's a penalty and consequence of the original sin that came upon them such that they die. Can I call it a baptism? They were sinless, killed by something that was not their guilt. I think so. Right?
Did they
I
have an
wouldn't be
opportunity to
surprised.
reject sufficient grace? I don't know that they had an opportunity to reject sufficient
Yeah.
grace anytime,
So
or
if
what
it's
that.
like,
Yeah.
so I think that that's like a very clear path that we get what we need for them. So this is on the table, I think. Um, and as far as your point about people who are in like terrible situations, I 1,000 bazillion percent support that. Um, I mean, I have a construction company, very small construction company, and I'll have random people coming in and helping out with things. And I've had more than one murderer, and not like one murder, multiple murder. One
More
guy
than
was a
one. Stay safe out
one,
there.
yeah, one guy, it turns out, was a cartel killer in Mexico. And not like he turned his life around. He's just not in Mexico anymore. And I'm like,
Oh my gosh.
we've both sat there. The guy got me some Burger King breakfast, and we're sitting there and we're talking and we'll laugh and we have nicknames and we eat breakfast together. It's like, okay, would I say this guy's my best friend? No. But like, listen, dude, I mean, if I was in his situation, would I be a worse guy? Probably. I get the overwhelming feeling that God is nice to me and probably everybody, and that He puts us on the path where we have that real opportunity of salvation. It looks very, very different. But I know myself. If I grew up with like a tenth of the pain and horror that so many of these people did, I would hate God, and I'd jump right into hell. And like, but by the grace of God go I. The thing which drives me crazy about the hell discussion is when some people want to think of it as like an us versus them, like we're the in group, we go to heaven, and then there's you guys who go to hell. It's just like, you don't know anything. Like, do you know how many people walked around in Jesus's days, like as the Pharisees, thinking like we're the holy ones? And Jesus saves his most vicious condemnations for those people. It's like, oh, you think you're holy. It's like, no, 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 no. You have so much knowledge. You have so much grace. You have so much going for you, and you still fail? Do you know that the debt of sin that's on that? Like, dude, I mean, the story of the one person who goes out and gives this giant tithe, and then the person with the little 2 pennies, the little widow that gives a two, and he's like, who gave more? It's not a hard question. The one who gave those 2 little pennies. So when I see, oh, there's somebody who goes to church every Sunday and they're seemingly so wonderful, it's like, listen, they're rich. Okay. They're really rich. The question isn't how rich are you? The question is, what are you giving to God? And not in absolute terms, but in relative terms. So if you have that drug addict, prostitute, murderer person, and they give their 2 pennies to God, cool. You know, if you live this wonderful little life and you've never experienced pain, and the most that you can give is what appears to be a nice and good life, could be in danger of hell. I don't know. I don't know people's minds. I
Yeah,
don't know people's hearts. So, a lot of people. I know I'm diatribing here. It's almost unstoppable.
I
So
got
feel
some
free to
follow up
jump
when
in.
you're done.
Okay. One last point. A lot of people want to talk about, the dare we hope. Do we hope for the salvation of all? My view is no. And I don't think we should hope for all people's salvation because, as much as sometimes Thomists bug me, I'm a Thomist, all right? Like, at the end of the day, I'm a big Thomas Aquinas fan. I wouldn't say Thomas Aquinas hack, but we're borderline here. I mean, yeah, he's called the most sure guide to the Catholic faith, and I need all the help I can get. And he talks about how, our hope, the hope itself, is principally directed at the Father, um, and for eternal life, and that we're targeting the means by which eternal life is brought about is a proper object of our hope. And I'm like, okay, well, if that's it, then what is the means by which we are saved? It's like, ultimately, it's the action of God. I think it's the efficacious grace. I think it's God's election. I think it's all of those things, right? It's His upholding of our will such that we can choose Him. So in that case, is that something that's universal and to everyone? Well, no, it's not. Okay, then if our object of our hope is for the means of salvation, and the means of salvation is not universal, then our hope cannot be universal. So in that respect, I'm like, nope, I can't. I'm not going to hope for the salvation of all. But here's kind of the plot twist: I definitely hope for the salvation of each. So just because it's like, oh, I'm a cartel murderer, I'm a prostitute, I'm a this and that, no, I still actively hope for their salvation. And I totally think that that's possible for the salvation of each and every person, but not all people together. Like that's kind of my end of the day where I'm at. I'm a hopeful universalist if universalism means each, but not every. Just because I'm a pedantic little punk about the virtue of hope. Um, yeah, there you
Yeah.
go.
Well, I think the only reason I would say I hope for all is because my understanding of sufficient grace, where Christ came to save all, and it's the hope that it's God's will that all should be saved, that
Mhm,
none shall be lost. So I would say I agree with much of Thomism, but I
mhm,
do not agree with their view of sufficient grace, because I think the version of sufficient grace that I think makes its way into the catechism and into the official magisterial documents, I do not think is the same as the kind of Banez Thomism. Maybe there's some people who can read Thomas in different ways, but the view where we all receive sufficient grace, but it's not really that sufficient in the sense that I believe in it. The Thomist view, I don't think sufficient grace is sufficient, because they don't believe it has any effect until you receive efficacious grace. Only certain people receive efficacious grace in that system. And so it's really seems to me a sleight of hand to call it sufficient grace. It'd be like everybody gets a car and they can all drive to the kingdom of heaven and you're all going to be fine. Only these 5 people get a key. It's like
right.
the
Okay.
efficacious
Okay.
grace is a
I hear
key,
that.
where that sufficient grace is kind of worthless.
Mm,
So to me, I think they're technically in line with Catholic doctrine on that point, but not with the spirit or intent of it on how they formulate sufficient versus efficacious grace. Because if I have something that's sufficient but has a 0% chance of working, is it really sufficient? So that was what the during the De Auxiliis controversy, that's what Bellarmine and Molina and these people would push.
mhm.
They would
Well,
push
what do you
against
think
that.
about
I don't
Molinism?
necessarily agree with congruism or Molinism as
Uh-huh.
alternatives.
Okay.
However, I think Jesuits made a great point pushing back on, that 16th century Banez version of Thomism, that this doesn't really respect free will as a something within the person that's not just an effect of an outside force that they don't really have. And then also just what is sufficient grace if it's not actually has
Right.
any chance of working for anybody other than those unconditionally elected. So that might be a great discussion. I don't know if we could get into
No, probably not,
so
and we
much of
should
that.
probably start wrapping it up, but kinda, Molinism is interesting. What do you have a feeling or a thought on Molinism? Where are you at with that? I to my knowledge, it's not out of bounds in the church. That's permissible theological opinion, unless there's
Yeah.
something I don't know. So, what do you think of that? Because that does something. I mean, okay, for the listeners, it's the idea that God can look ahead and see all possibilities that free creatures could choose, and then He looks through all the possible worlds, and He says, "Ooh, this one is the best one where the most free creatures are going to choose me." And He goes, bang, and actualizes that world. I don't know. Is that a reasonable summary?
I think so. Yeah. The middle knowledge. And um, so I guess the reason I don't like it is because man, I have something caught in my throat. I keep coughing. I don't know if I can edit that out, but the reason I don't always love it is it seems like um, predestination with the the elect and reprobate
Mhm.
to the Thomist system, but just with a couple more steps, maybe, or just basically, you know, he's actualizing a world out of many possible worlds. Where, let's say me, I'd say there's a ton of possible worlds where I'm saved,
Mhm.
and then there's one possible world where I'm damned. I mean, obviously, there's more than 21 possible worlds, but let's just say there's not. And so most of the time I'm saved, but this one time that happens to be more people are saved than me in this other one
Then
where
you
I'm not saved,
take one for the
then
team.
okay,
Yeah.
well, what is the judgment of my future being based off of? It's being based off of almost consequentialism. You know,
Mhm. Mhm.
you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet here, and this guy just to make this world, I have to. These people are kind of um, they're victims to that process, but it's consequentialist in a way. And so, what really I've heard some say that people are multiverse damned, or they have something like that, where basically that person would be damned in any possible world. So it's not like God is doing that. It's not like He's picking a world. But to that, I would say, okay, so if I'm the kind of creature that would be damned in any possible situation that you put me in, did He really create a good creature? Am I
Mhm.
to what
Mhm.
degree am I good if I'm so evil that you can put me in any situation, and I would never do the right thing? To then that kind of begs the question to me, like, why are these creatures with no possibility of doing good being created? So those are the
Mhm.
two. Either way you look
Okay.
at it, to me,
Yeah.
Molinism doesn't quite make sense to me.
Super quick thoughts, and then I'm gonna jump in a giant theological puddle, and then we can probably swim our way out to wrap it on up. Um, First thought is, I think in under that framing, yep, critiques are damning. I think if we change it to my preferred framing of there's workers and lottery winners, then I can see why he would, because I don't think anybody's going to be created that's like pure evil. I don't even know what that means, right? So there's going to be some good that God is actively willing in creating even somebody who we would say that guy's pretty evil. And if he uses that in order to bring about a greater good, we'd go, okay, yeah, that's reasonable. So if he's creating like just people to torment so that people can benefit, that doesn't seem to preserve his character. But if we say he's creating some people who get regular wages so that he can bring about some lottery winners, and that shows his character as being just to everybody and being overabundant to others, then that kind of matches like the Paul's logic of some are vessels for destruction and some for holy use. Because the destruction here isn't like, I mean, we can lean on what you said, right? It's a destruction of bad stuff, but it's not a repudiation of the vessels. Right? The vessels were both made with great care, Paul says. So he does care for each, he loves each, but he's trying to demonstrate his character just to all the workers. And some of those workers get lottery tickets that get them to heaven, which shows his superabundant love. So he gives a more broad spectrum of his character revealed to creation. That's my short. Now for the jumping in the puddle. Free will is very complicated, as I'm sure everybody in the world should be aware.
Libertarian versus compatibilism.
So in order to preserve the idea that you are making the choice as you, then this, and this is deep waters here, so, some small print applies. It seems to me that it requires your existence. Because when we're talking about you creating as you, then this implies that you exist. So I don't really see how one could take a middle knowledge position that says, I know what David Larson would do if he existed, because the concept of David Larson, such that he can execute free will decisions, does not exist prior to his being paired with existence. And if he was paired with existence, he's no longer a theoretical possible being. He's now an actual being that was brought into existence, and we're no longer in the middle knowledge world. And so far, so Thomist, right? But one of the implications for this is when we talk about, well, we kind of assume middle knowledge and then we import it to Thomism on accident, I think, where we go, wait a minute, why would God make this free creature that he knows is going to reject him? I'm like, I don't know, hang on, back up. Maybe God knows what type of creature a David Larson is and says, that's a good creature, and I'm going to give him free will. And that the knowledge of what your free will decisions are not present in a potential something inside of God, because your free will decisions follow directly and immediately upon you constituted in reality. So they're only present in reality, in your creation, upon your granting of existence, not prior, because that's logically anterior to your existence.
So that open
Ergo,
theism a little bit?
yeah, I don't know. This is where it gets really tricky. So at that point, we'd say, why would God have created Satan? We go, because a Satan's good. A Satan as such is good, such that his essence is good, such that it's worth being paired with existence, even in light of his free will. Okay, he pairs it with existence. That doesn't mean that there's new knowledge that goes to God, because all knowledge is just like downstream of God and his granting of existence. So he knows things through creating those things. So we're not screwing up anything there. And now he comes about and acts according to what he is. But if we say that's deterministic according to his pre-existing essence, then we violated what we mean by free will. He acts in accord with what it means for a Satan essence to actually exist, which the results of which are only downstream of his existing. So God creates all these good creatures, and the good creatures truly have free will such that they create real effects. And then those effects which cause changes to one another are then guided providentially such that all things eventually redound to good for those that love him. And then hell is the final sorting out of justice according to what free creatures who were granted existence, whose essence were definitely good and were worth creating, played out in reality with everything else. That's the theological puddle I jump in. And if we include that, why would God create them? Because they're good. Why did they sin? Because they're them. Why did God create them such that they would sin in this way? Wrong. That's violating free will. You're assuming determinism. Why would God create them if he knew they would sin? No, their being actual is upstream of their free will decision. But doesn't
Hold
that
on,
change
though.
God's mind? No, because he's the cause of all of this events to begin with, including their freedom. All right. What do you think? All right.
I don't know if I understand how the Thomist view you hold with in connection with that, and that if God's granting them free will
Mhm.
from the Thomist view, from Thomism, it seems like he is planning beforehand and unconditionally decided who gets efficacious grace. It's not that he he sees a good form of Satan or of Jake, and then makes it happen, and they make free decisions, and then he guides it from there. It seems more that he's decided to create a world and not provide efficacious grace at key moments for key people. One, causing the fall, and then that causes the fall, and then also from those people who are born in original sin due to that, then not freeing them from their chains to sin, their slavery to sin with efficacious grace, which is the only thing that can pull them out. So, I guess my view of Thomism, I like what you described, but I'm just not sure if it overlaps with Thomism completely. At least the sort of the Banez version.
I think it does, because we would hang on to efficacious grace in this, and then we just say these creatures with free wills, God could give enough grace to cause them to arrive at a choice for Him reliably with their free will. So we just say God can give you enough grace such that you freely choose Him, and that would be efficacious grace. So we could say, okay, that still works, but the interesting part is what it does with the what's the word? The something other grace. What am I looking for? Sufficient grace.
Sufficient.
Because your critique was right. It was, hang on, if we take the more deterministic model, which I think is kind of what we were assuming, um, then sufficient grace is being given a car without the keys. However, if we say the keys are the free will, then sufficient grace is you're given a car and you have the keys. The question is, do you start it? And the starting it is just what it means to have free will. The starting or not starting comes completely from you. The keys are the free will, the car is the sufficient grace. But efficacious grace would be, you have the keys, God gives you the car, God then puts you in the car and then makes it the greatest thing in the world to turn the ignition, and you reliably do so. So now it takes away the critique that sufficient grace loses all value. It doesn't. You have the keys, you have the car. The decision's truly yours.
I
Whereas
don't
the
see how it's
decision,
truly yours though if you can't do it. If there's zero chance that you're going to do it though, to me
but
that
the
just
chance,
eliminates.
you do have a chance in that the chance is, you could have gone one way or another, and that's up to you as you, right? So like, could Satan have been good? It's like, well, that was a Satan choice, not a God choice, right? So your chance comes from the fact that you are granted existence as you, and when you're granted as you existence and you include free will, the real possibility of choosing one way or another is there and reflective of what you are in total, not what something outside of you is deterministically pushing into. The
Well, it's
choice
within us.
terminates
It's
in you.
within us, but isn't it? It's within us, but it's either my will is a slave to sin, or my will is 100%, infallibly going towards God, and my will has been freed from the chains, and so either way, my will isn't self-determinative in the sense that there is a force, whether original sin chaining me or God freeing me, that is making the call. That's my point, I guess.
Um,
From a libertarian model, it just
okay.
seems
You think
like
it's okay. I guess I would say it's, so you're being lured one way or another. I think you're being pulled one way or another. It's kind of like if you do like a random distribution, and then you could skew it one way or another with like a covariable. I think that's what's going on. That if we take, what's the type? I was actually working on this recently, but so you have a random distribution and you do a covariable which completely overwhelms the distribution of randomness, where you say, okay, the variable goes in between 1 and 10. 10 is choose God, 1 is choose hell. Random distribution goes like this. Then you could use grace to say, all right, that outcome, let's say it was a 7, gets multiplied by 1,000. So the distribution goes boom and just asymptotically goes up towards choosing God. I think that's like efficacious grace. But if the random variable is not really random, but it's representative of the free will choice, which is determined by nothing other than you as you, then the grace can skew your real chance of going to heaven or hell based on how much you have. It's like, live a horrible life. I don't know. Maybe that actually skews you up. I don't know what God does. Some people respond to horrible circumstances by calling out to God. Some people do it by rejecting God. I don't know. But certainly not everybody has the equal amount of grace. You got the Virgin Mary over here, and then you got, like, I don't know, somebody else over here, Hitler over there. That's how I view it. I think the grace is a covariable to your free will orientation for or against God, and it can overwhelm it because you can multiply it by infinity because God could give infinite grace theoretically. At which point it's all but certain that you choose it, but it's still your free will is preserved. It's just radically strengthened.
It just doesn't. It seems like a little sleight of hand to me, I guess, in that it's
Okay.
still saying 100%. You have this, you choose
Mm-hmm.
this way.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have it, you're going to choose this way. Maybe that's not our main topic, but I think
Yeah, I guess
uh,
in the end I'm good with that because I reform. I was a Calvinist for a while, so I've already at peace with. I don't know if God does this with His creations and He's just. Then, like, if you're paid your wages, good or bad, and you're created thus or not that, I've kind of like already like settled that part. Maybe too much. I don't know. That's possible. But yeah, you want to kind of wrap up where on earth we trod today, and kind of give whoever may or may not still be listening what you would want to what you would want
yeah.
to kind of tell them at the end. Maybe somebody who's just considering like leaving the faith or radically departing from what the church has infallibly taught. um what's your pitch? Go for it. Wrap us up, David. What do you have?
Well, I think to somebody who's troubled by hell, which a lot of people are, I've noticed that both in G.K. Chesterton's Orthodoxy, he talks about hell as that doctrine that has troubled many just souls, he said. Why would it
Mm-hmm.
trouble so many just souls? And then in C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity, I believe, he said, if I could change one doctrine of Christianity, it would be hell. And then I have just a million quotes like that from more recent people too, where they just look at it and they're like, this violates my sense of justice, my sense of God's goodness, and all of that. So you're not alone if you're thinking that. A lot of the best Christian minds who stayed within the tradition have had thoughts like that. And I think it's important to realize that the kind of boundary markers for staying within orthodoxy might be wider than, if you read the medieval saints and you say, oh, this is what the church teaches, the way they viewed these doctrines. That you don't have to see it that way. There's a number of theologians that have been meticulous in trying to stay within those doctrinal boundaries, while having much more hopeful and merciful looks. Like we mentioned a couple, like Hans Urs von Balthasar, who was almost a cardinal, I guess, but he was a favorite theologian of Vatican II. People good friends with John Paul II and Ratzinger, who had a view that we can really hope that because God wills the salvation of all, and because it was Jesus's plan to come to save all and give grace to all, that can we really count out the possibility that that Jesus is successful in his mission here? So that's one possibility, is the Balthasar Dare We Hope. We also mentioned Pope Benedict's view that the great majority will go to heaven, but through purgatory. That basically there is a wide almost spectrum of how we respond to grace, everything from complete openness to the truth and love of God to complete being closed, and then the great majority in the middle, open to degrees. I hope that Pope Benedict is within orthodoxy, so I'm assuming that's obviously that's somewhere where I would probably land in there as well. And then the Jacques Maritain kind of view, he had that book Untrammeled. What is it? There's Untrammeled Pathways or something like that. It's in French, but he was a 20th century Catholic theologian, considered a conservative, Vatican II, related to all those thinkers as well. But he thought that maybe we can't have the hope that everybody gets within the gates of heaven, but those people outside of it, they have a variety of interactions with their punishments and places, and how they respond to, not how they respond, but their relation to being and goodness and God. And that over time, maybe through the prayers even of um, the saved, the elect that are praying that everyone be given mercy, that they'll move closer and closer to a limbus and edge of hell. So that's another possibility. Um, I even wonder, I haven't fully fleshed this out, but Vatican II and Lumen Gentium 14 to 16 talks about how being within the church, there's no salvation outside the church, but being within the church, we can almost think of it in a hierarchical way where there's the fullness of true religion, and then we have separated brothers who have some of the sacraments, and there's sufficient grace there to for salvation. That also there's different ways of being joined or related to true religion to lesser degrees, and there's ignorance that can mitigate that. It talks about, the monotheists that worship the one God, and sort of the idea that maybe people could be, if they're really responding to the sufficient grace given to them, they will move over time closer and closer to up the mountain to truth, beauty, and goodness. And so my thought is that's kind of a, I guess, Thomistic, participatory, analogical understanding um, of true religion, where there is that, but then there's other versions of truth and goodness that maybe have incomplete or partial analogy to the primary analog. And so I wonder if a similar thing can be said of the afterlife, in that there's these states of being in union with God and being separated from God. And if there are things that they're a little bit more, it seems like they're on a scale where, there's the greatest in heaven and there's the least in heaven. There's the most punished in hell and there's the least punished in hell. And all that is related in a similar way to how we are directed towards God or not, how close we are towards goodness and truth. And maybe at some level, there's a barrier for whether you have the beatific vision or you don't. But
Mhm.
there's a level to which all of us are going to be participating in, um, maybe initially after our death, we're participating to greater or lesser degrees in these concepts of union with God and separation from God through our lives, and our judgment will um, make that evident. So it's sort of maybe another participatory view of the two, of heaven and hell. But I think there's a ton of ways of looking at it, and I think, as both of us have said, um, if you're a person who struggles with that and you have sort of the medieval vision in your mind of, and I don't blame you for having that in your mind, because it was a vision that was put out there for many centuries, that
Mhm.
it's barely anybody saved, and those who aren't, here's exactly what
Super
that
bad.
looks like.
Yeah.
It's real bad. And so I
And
can't
maybe
blame
that's
you.
the case,
Yeah,
but the
and I
you know,
I can't I
no
can't
for
blame
sure.
people for having that view
Mhm.
of it, but I would just tell you that if that seems unjust to you, and mercy and goodness and justice seems like it demands more, you are not more merciful than God. You're not more just than God. You're not more loving than God. So if you're having that thought, this is unworthy of God, and you can imagine something greater. I think it was Anselm maybe who said, God is the greatest thing to which we can think of. If you can think of something greater, like something more merciful, something more loving, then you're probably right, because that thing would
Mhm.
be God, if you can imagine something greater, because you can't imagine the greatness of God. So all that to say, there's a lot of ways of thinking about it, but don't feel like you have to accept the most harsh, Alphonsus Liguori or Saint Augustine vision taken at face value, without a lot of other thoughts that maybe people before Augustine, a lot of the saints before, had much more merciful views of it, or much more hopeful views, I should say. And since Vatican II, I think there's that ressourcement back to pre-Augustine that has a lot of also people like Martin and Balthazar and Benedict more hopeful views. So just give it more thought, and there's as we said, a lot of ways to think of it. Main thing to me is maintaining the character of God, because that is something that shouldn't be in question.
Bingo. Yeah, if it leads you to painting a god who looks really evil, you did your math wrong somewhere. And like we've had a bunch of ways you could have done your math wrong. People aren't evil enough. Hell's not what you think. There's a lot of variables you've assumed, so you did your math wrong somewhere if God is a monster, right? That's for certain. I think the only real big guardrails are uh, we got to say if you die in a state of mortal sin, you go to hell. But we don't always know what mortal sin looks like because we don't know hearts and minds. Um, if you get to hell, not Sheol, which could include, yes, maybe purgatory, depending on, but like if you get to hell, then okay, you can't get out and go get the beatific vision later. Um, that's a guardrail. That's like sin of origin stuff. Feel like Thomas Aquinas says those in hell have their hearts devoid of charity, but I don't know exactly what he means by that. I think it means the supernatural charity, the Holy Spirit, which I don't know. We double check that one as a guardrail. I don't know the implications. What are the guardrails would you warn people against?
Well, for one, and you might disagree with me on this, but if Aquinas says it, I don't think that is.
That's true. That's true. Right,
I
right,
don't
right.
think
Yeah,
a
yeah.
lot of Aquinas
Uh-huh.
is on, but I do think the
Mhm.
Catechism and the constitutions of the Church and all that are true. But I think you're right that mortal sin, if if we can definitively say this person has committed a mortal sin and then died, and they
Sure.
did not,
Right.
then I think you're right. That would mean by definition, the way we're defining hell, the way we're defining mortal sin is there. I think also Origenism, they said, was a full kind of restoration of all things. I think
Hmm.
you could have a full reconciliation in a sense, but not everybody's going to be restored to what they full glory of everything or to the beatific vision. Maybe those people in some form of limbo or whatever can have some sense of reconciliation to goodness, but it wouldn't be a restoration to. So there's a distinction there. If you go to hell, that does mean that you're not going to have the beatific vision. And I guess to me, there's some guardrails like sufficient grace, which if you're going to say who's in heaven or hell, you shouldn't just say, somebody because they were born before Christ, or somebody before they were, or somebody was, unbaptized baby and died, or some of these situations where you really have to think, what would sufficient grace look like for that person?
Yeah.
And what
That's a good.
what could be the circumstance that would have saved that person? So
Mhm.
sometimes it's confusing, but yeah, other guardrails. I mean, being inside the church is one, but there's ways to be joined to the church through a variety of ways. So yeah, um,
Cool.
purgatory is something that is big for Catholics. Just finding that if you're not totally pure in this life, that's okay. We've got a wash cycle after the fact.
Exactly. And I mean, purgatory and hell, I mean, serve a purpose. And the purpose is, justice. And like everybody, I mean, Aquinas says, I know, not everything Aquinas says, but he does say one of the joys of heaven is to witness the pains of hell. And most people are like, that's awful. I'm like, well, I know, right? Yeah, there's a lot in the awful camp. I'm like, me and Aquinas will be peeking over the edge, like, oh, is he going to get him with this? Oh, we got him.
Oh man.
We all know that like there's a line between like being sick and awful and evil and being like, oh, I love to see people get hurt. But then we also know like when you see the hero of the story finally win and like the evil person is punished justly, the crowd cheers. And that's not wrong. Like we like to see that justice is done, that good triumphs over evil. That's got to be proportionally, right? Like if Luke defeats, the emperor and then there's like 58 hours of him torturing the emperor, oh, that's a little weird. But if we see that, okay, he throws him down the whatever it is, I don't know, I haven't seen it forever. Okay, that was a proportionate, just punishment for what he did, and we can all celebrate, we can cheer for this. So I guess my little bit of a happy hope is hell has upside. We only kind of tried to mitigate the downside, but justice is good. And that retribution for evil is a positive thing. It is a good itself. And we can cheer for that good, right? Not in excess. but in proportion, because that's something God actively would bring about. It's the punishment of the wicked. So being in union with that expectation, totally fine. Just don't be a jerk about it. But yeah, you don't have to
A
watch. You don't
topic
love
that
me if you
we
get over the edge.
a topic that we could talk about another time just popped in my head that it's going to make me sound like a new agey person, but I just came across near death experiences. It's been
Yeah,
fascinating to me
d-
that a lot of
discuss it. Yeah.
they've actually have like a study center for now where people who have them, um, they there was a book Life After Life, but it's just interesting to see there's almost a pattern to them, but just what people experience of a lot of them meet Jesus. Um, Even
Yeah.
people who are not
Cool.
religious, it's like you rise above your body. There's a kind of a vortex of light you go into,
Mhm,
and you meet your relatives, and there's a really warm light around you, and then you meet kind of uh, a Jesus figure. So it's almost like
mhm,
it's
mhm.
interesting because people have the same pattern
Yeah. Yeah.
regardless of atheist, whatever, they're like, yeah, it was Jesus. So that's kind of interesting to me, and definitely that's a
Mhm,
topic for another day. But
mhm, mhm.
the level of love and all of that in there, it was a little reassuring to me. That's a big
Yeah.
can of worms to open up right before we end.
Oh,
So let me
definitely.
just pretend
Well,
I didn't say any of that.
Jimmy Akin's done some stuff on that, which I think is really good. I think Pat Flynn, has done some work on it. I don't know if he's put anything out on it, but I know he's been studying it, so he's doing something with that. So yeah. Well, cool. Well, listeners, thanks for getting through. What is this? Over 2 hours of
Yeah.
hell, which may have felt like hell to some. I don't know. It didn't for
It's
us. I
not
had fun.
Matt Frad or those guys that go 3 hours on Matt Frad and all that.
No,
So
no. But we
we're easier than
covered,
that, but
yeah.
only two.
So thanks for joining us, guys. Go and visit David Larson at the Once and Future Church and hit all the buttons and stuff. Something I never remind people to do. Which is probably why my channel has like 3 people plus my mom that listen. But we're grateful for all of you. And
Absolutely.
cool. Well, thank you, David.
Thanks
I
for having me.
greatly enjoyed it. Of
Thanks a lot.
course. Yep.
It was a lot of fun.